afternoon, everybody. My name is Emmanuel Brunet-Jailly. I'm going to be chairing this panel. The name of the panel is Border Walls and Politics. Now, the participants to this panel are Menachem Klein, Jerusalem Rethinking Hard Border Walls, Eszter Salgo, the political aesthetic of the Hungary border fence, Margaret Walker and Jared van Ramshorst, subordinating space, immigration enforcement, hierarchy, and the politics of scale in Mexico and Central America. Oops, I've missed somebody, sorry. Saddiki, border walls in the Gulf, political and security dimension, and then will come Margath and Jared, and then Jussi Laine, the Finnish-Russian border revisited, rebordering the pragmatic frame. In this order, so Menachem, the floor is yours.
Okay, good afternoon. I will speak about a work in progress relating to the possible future and much less about the present and the past, although I can speak for generations about the past, so I will skip the past. Okay, let's start with a short presentation about the present. So you can read here what the problem is. Jerusalem, unlike the border areas that we spoke from yesterday up to this afternoon, is a living entity, a living city, a big city. So if we speak about a peace treaty between Israel and Palestine within the framework of two-state solution, a group of Israelis and Palestinians that I am part of, we came to the conclusion that we must rethink the hard border that once we suggested in the late 90s, that we suggested within the peace agreement between Israel and Palestine. Jerusalem went since the 90s, went through dramatic changes on the ground. So our proposal is bottom-up based, starting from the reality on the ground, not from any theoretical framework or theory of borders or theory of peace agreement and so on. So what's the problem? This is the map, not so updated, but you can see here the brown are Palestinian neighborhoods and the blue areas are Israeli neighborhoods, Jewish neighborhoods, and where the West Jerusalem should be also in blue. The green line is the pre-67 war border. The blue line is the Israeli annexation, unilateral illegal annexation of East Jerusalem, that you can see that it cuts through the Palestinian neighborhoods. And the big red that goes also to the right side, to the east of Jerusalem, the red line is the wall that Israel built in 2013, 2015, not fully completed because of international pressure, but it cuts the Jerusalem area from the rest of the West Bank. So I will not speak about the settlements and the wall and so on. But if we want to have a peace treaty between Israel and Palestine based on two-state solution and two capitals in this area, which is a very, very big, I would like to just to remind you that Israel rules Jerusalem more than the Jordanians and the British mandatory regime altogether, combined. And Israel changed Jerusalem dramatically. Never in history Jerusalem was so big and so populated. Now, if we want to kill the two capitals, Al-Quds and Yerushalayim, if we want to kill Jerusalem, so the idea is divide physically the two cities and create a hard border between between the two cities, and then it will be a neglected area, 100% neglected area, and it goes against the interest of the Jerusalemites and the two people. Okay, the idea in Camp David 2000, also adopted by President Clinton, is to divide Jerusalem between Israelis and Palestinians based on ethnic lines, including the old city. So build kind of a hard border around the old city and between Israeli and Palestinian neighborhoods. The problems that this idea meets in the 21st century are listed here. There are major problems. And I would like to add something to these problems that are here. The wall that Israel built that divides the West Bank from East Jerusalem brought the Palestinians of East Jerusalem towards the West and to improve their relationship with the Jewish Jerusalem. For instance, 40% of the labor force in West Jerusalem, in Jewish Jerusalem, are Palestinians from East Jerusalem. So it's impossible. There is mutual dependency between the Arab city and the Jewish city. If we build a hard border between them, it will kill both of them. So a group of classical track 2 diplomacy group, a group of Israelis and Palestinians all together, we came up suggesting, we did not complete it. It's a work in progress, but we suggest several solutions to problems in order to prevent the hard border cut between the two cities. So we have proposals regarding economy, infrastructure, policing, and so on. The group is formed up by Jerusalemites that we know the situation on the ground and we live in the city, and therefore we care about the city much more than those who live in Tel Aviv or the governments, the Israeli government and the Palestinian Authority, the PLO leadership in Ramallah. Here I would like to stress that a state and institution-led perspective is very, very different from a city view. And we are concerned about the city. The tragedy in Camp David was that the Jerusalemites were not included in the negotiation team. So the government, the administration led it, mostly generals, and from the PLO, though, it was led by people that do not live in the city and they don't know the city. Now, the big challenge is not economy, not infrastructure. The big challenge of our work in order to prevent the hard border is security. And here we are open to new ideas. Our approach is to build on advanced technology in order to prevent a hard border. Still, I must say, the Israeli security establishment is stuck with the old border system that every person and every parcel and every suitcase must be checked at a certain point and in order to be cleared by the security. And every Palestinian is suspected. And the Palestinian must be cleared. He is not innocent unless he is cleared, he or she. That's the problem. That's the catch of the Israeli security mind. So we have to change the concept of security checks in in border crossing. Impossible to build, and we show it in details in a document that I will give you the website of the document. It is impossible to build airport-style crossing point between the two cities. It is impossible. It will create a bottleneck. It's impossible to host, for instance, in the old city, 9 million tourists per year and let them in and out. 9 million annually is the number of tourists that come to visit the pyramids in Egypt. Assuming that there is a peace between Israel and Palestine, it's clear that the old city of Jerusalem with the holy sites is the most attractive place in the region. If we want to host in the old city 9 million people annually, we cannot build a checkpoint near Jaffa Gate or Damascus Gate as it was suggested in 2000. It's impossible. Practically, it is impossible. It's not conceptually, it's practically. Add to that all what was said this morning about the concept and the psychological impact of hard border, and we don't want to have Nicosia in Jerusalem. Definitely not Berlin Wall in Jerusalem. It is impossible to have it and still keep the two capitals as a living entity. So if you want some more, here this is the more information. Here is the document. Thank you. I open to questions and challenges and so on, and invite everybody to contribute thinking on this.
Okay, and the second paper is by Eszter Salgo, The Political Aesthetics of the Hungarian Border Fence.
Thank you very much. It is a pleasure to be here. It is a pleasure to join a conversation that started many years ago. It is a pleasure to join a group of scholars and friends. So thank you, Elizabeth, and many thanks to the organizers of this event for inviting me. 33 years ago, Hungary was the country that tore a hole in the Iron Curtain by opening the border between Hungary and Austria and allowing thousands of East Germans to enter and to flee to Western Germany. Now Hungary is infamous for the anti-refugee propaganda, and it is infamous for being among the first countries to erect a wall on its southern border. What makes the Hungarian solution to migration unique is that the wall, in fact, could be seen as key prop in the marketing campaign of the Hungarian government. So it's worth analyzing and having a conversation on the visual propaganda of the organization, on the aestheticization of defense and the aestheticization of the border guards, and also to bring in insights from political anthropology to reflect on what Marius Benta calls the shrine in a carceral society. On the 15th of September this year, the European Parliament adopted a report that defines Hungary as a hybrid regime of electoral autocracy. So not a democracy anymore, but a hybrid regime of electoral autocracy. Viktor Orban, the Prime Minister of Hungary, the day after launched a video on his Facebook account, in which, of course, instead of commenting on this report, launched a video that we are going to watch together. This video, just a second, this video sort of reminds Hungarians, and not only of the Battle of Röszke, no? That battle that between the Hungarian police and refugees, no? That occurred 7 years ago. So let's run this video.
Migránsoknak meg kell érteniük, hogy itt
migrants must understand that they cannot cross the border. And you are the ones who need to make them understand. You border hunters must stop them, you must intercept them, you must search for them, find them, and you have to make them leave Hungary. You have to make them leave one by one. And similar videos that often resemble action movies are shared on the Facebook, Instagram pages of the Prime Minister, of the government, and the police. The same speech, Viktor Orban delivered the same speech on the 9th of September at the swearing-in ceremony of the Hungarian border hunters regiment. So this, in 2015, Hungary was a transit country, and it is in 2015 when the border fence was erected. It transformed very quickly into what is today seen as a smart fence. A smart fence thanks to its high-tech features. So it transformed into a militarized zone. Initially, it was built by public workers and prisoners, as you can see, and now it is controlled by a newly recruited specialized police that I referred to, that are called the border hunters. Border hunters and field guards. The field guards are directed by the mayor of Ásotthalom, a very small village at the border with Serbia, and Torotskai, its leader, became a celebrity for the European far right, now for declaring the village, his village as an LGBT free zone, and for launching those films in which border hunters and field guards appear like a little bit like, as Jenny now referred to, the white protagonists of films with an apocalyptic effect. Recruitment of border hunters started in 2016, and you can see that recruitment was conducted everywhere, in secondary schools, in high schools, in shopping malls, in village fairs. Even children are targeted, so there is an explicit goal to shape children's mindset, to make sure that they become heroes and not victims and perpetrators. And it's interesting to see, and to reflect on how architecture, now architecture is never neutral, architecture is always political. It's interesting to reflect on the proliferation of police stations. So in more than 10 different cities, police stations that host border hunters were constructed. And Zizek sort of reminds us, in order to understand the obscene secret of the Soviet Union, we need to analyze the houses. And these buildings do not remind us of contemporary modern police stations that are meant to be transparent and welcoming and friendly. I think They certainly remind me of the apartment blocks that existed, that still exist now in Hungary, but in Hungary and in many other Central and Eastern European countries that were built for the heroes of the worker heroes. These were built of the new heroes of a new Hungary, but they are lifeless, uniform, and I think they represent a new model of social control and a system of surveillance. And we can discuss more about this we can discuss this more in the discussion. Agnes Horváth and Marius Benta published an exciting book entitled Walling, Boundaries and Liminality. And in this book, Benta describes a form of hubris which has something to do with the inversion, an inversion specific of liminal eras, which is about reversing the place of the ophalos, the sacred center, with the wall. So Hungarian society, I think, is affected by this form of hubris, where walling practices and the wall are assigned a central position. So it is a society where the wall has become a device of unrestrained worship, a sanctuary in a new political religion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And our third paper by Saddiki, Border Walls in the Gulf, Political and Security Dimensions.
Good afternoon. My paper is on the security and political dimensions of the Gulf, of the border walls in the Gulf region. I mean by Gulf in my presentation the six member states of the Gulf Cooperation Council, which are Bahrain, Qatar, Kuwait, United Arab Emirates, and Saudi Arabia. So I focus especially on those countries because there are some authors that include also Iran, Yemen, and Iraq in the Gulf region. With the exception of Oman, other Gulf states were created in the beginning of the 20th century. And three of them, they were created in the early 1970s when the British left the region. The boundaries between the new Gulf states were generated by the European colonial powers, especially, of course, Britain, for political and economic purposes. The Western concept of sovereignty, which refers to the territorial sovereignty, did not exist in the Gulf before the European colonial age. The concept of sovereignty as it was practiced during the era of Islamic rule was largely a non-territorial notion and practice, and was based on the loyalty of individuals and communities, not on the exclusive or effective powers or jurisdiction that was exercised on the territory itself. However, the discovery of oil marked a turning point in the region's perception of the border. Given the growing importance of oil and gas revenues, the emerging Gulf states became interested in the knowing exactly where their sovereignty over the fields of these natural resources starts and where it ends. The discovery of and exploitation of oil not only caused new territorial disputes between Gulf states and their neighbors, but also developed the linear border perception in the Gulf. Instability and anarchy caused by the post-Cold War unipolar system, in addition to the lack of mutual trust between the Gulf states, prompted them to unilaterally secure their borders with physical and virtual walls. Kuwait was the first Gulf state to erect a wall on its border with Iraq shortly after its liberation from Saddam's Iraqi regime in 1991. This wall was initially built for a purely political purpose, aimed at giving a tangible and formal status to the internationally recognized border between the two countries. However, with the collapse of the Saddam's regime in Iraq and the increased activity of armed groups, this wall became a barrier to prevent the infiltration of these groups into Kuwait and to monitor the perimeter of the border. As for Saudi Arabia, it is today fenced off by itself in the south and in the south with Yemen and in the north with Iraq, and also it is fenced off from the east by the United Arab Emirates. Since 2009, Saudi Arabia erected a long security wall that spans 900 kilometers on its border with Iraq. On the southern borders, Saudi Arabia built one of the longest border walls in the world with Yemen, with which it shares about 1,470 kilometers of land border. Saudi Arabia has always faced security problems along the southern border, including irregular migration, drug and weapons trafficking, and people smuggling. Recently, the infiltration of armed groups has become increasingly dangerous. The United Arab Emirates does not face serious transnational security threat, but its border with Oman and Saudi Arabia have been entirely fenced. The political goal is the main reason for fortifying the United Arab Emirates border with Saudi Arabia to maintain the status quo of the current border, with which has long been the subject of controversy, and it contains important reserves of hydrocarbons. As for the main reason of the United Arab Emirates to fence its border with Oman is to prevent illegal cross-border movement, mainly irregular immigration. Those borders walls are not just highly quality barbed wire fences, but are complex electronic control fortifications equipped with new and sophisticated security technologies. Undoubtedly, these border fortifications have achieved some of their goals, but they don't work with all transnational security challenges with the same effectiveness. For example, the irregular crossing of land borders consists only a very small percentage of the irregular immigration to the Gulf countries, and this is almost limited to the Saudi-Yemeni border. The large number of immigrants who live and work in an irregular status in the Gulf countries did not enter through land borders, but through airports and with valid visas. Then they overstay or violate the conditions of their visas. Therefore, there is no significant impact of border walls and fortifications on the management of irregular migration. Although most of the Gulf border walls are usually justified by security narratives, also there are unstated political reasons behind these fortifications. The border security policies largely reflect the nature of the current Gulf subsystem, which is marked by suspicious relations between the Gulf states. Suspicion and distrust also cast a shadow over the relations of the Gulf state with their neighbors, mainly Yemen, Iraq, and Iran. This is why these countries are the most targeted countries for Gulf border security policies, whether on land or at sea. As a conclusion, I think, unlike most cases in the world, especially in Europe and North America, in which the economic security to a large extent explains the construction of border walls, in the Gulf region, the border walls were created for security and political goals. However, these border walls in the Gulf can also be viewed as a way to confirm the sovereign state and national identity due to the manner in which states in the region are formed. Also, this wall can be seen as an aspect of new state territorialization. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much. The fourth paper is by Margath Walker and Geert van Ramshorst, Subordinating Space, Immigration Enforcement, Hierarchy and the Politics of Scale in Mexico and Central America. The floor is yours.
So Maggie and I are really excited to be here to present a portion of our paper, which was recently published in a special section on the Mexico-Guatemala border that we co-edited for the open access journal Borders and Globalization Review. And we encourage you to find our paper and the rest of that special section online. But with the remainder of our time today, we'd like to structure our talk around the following few points. So first, we want to begin with an introduction that really lays the foundation and sets the backdrop for our paper and its argument. And second, we'll provide a little bit of historical context on the Mexico-Guatemala border and expand upon our notion of what we call spatial hierarchy, which we mobilize throughout the paper to better understand border and immigration enforcement in Mexico. Third, drawing from policy analysis, we'll briefly highlight two examples of how immigration policy, not in the United States, but in Mexico, produces and relies upon our vision of spatial hierarchy, in particular to produce a kind of spatial imaginary in which Mexico and the United States are increasingly designated as superior and set apart from Central and South America to the south of that border, before, of course, wrapping up. So recently, a series of so-called crises along the US-Mexico border have drawn significant attention to bordering practices, immigration enforcement, and international migration in North America. In summer 2014, thousands of women and children from Central America arrived at the US-Mexico border in South Texas. And while many of these arriving migrants voluntarily turned themselves over to immigration authorities to claim asylum, the Obama administration was quick to declare an urgent humanitarian situation and, quote, crisis on the border, end quote, requesting more than $3.7 billion to expand detention facilities, increase surveillance efforts, and hire additional Border Patrol agents and immigration judges. Less than 4 years later, another so-called crisis erupted at the US-Mexico border as a large caravan of migrants set off from San Pedro Sula in Honduras in hopes of reaching the United States. Now, for years, advocacy groups in Mexico and Central America had organized similar caravans to protect migrants as they traveled north. However, in 2018, the event kicked off a media frenzy in the United States, igniting public debate over international migration and border and immigration enforcement once again. The Trump administration described the movement of people from Central America as a national emergency and an invasion, mobilizing military personnel at the US-Mexico border to intercept them. Together, these events reflect the growing importance of Central American migration and an ever-expanding landscape of border and immigration enforcement aimed at impeding, incapacitating, and policing migrants across North America. The United States, for example, has steadily fortified and militarized its southern border while extending the reach of immigration and customs enforcement and surveillance far into the US interior. Meanwhile, a growing, robust, and fully private industry of immigrant detention has emerged in the United States to satisfy the federal government's appetite for holding and incarcerating migrants. Yet Mexico has also worked simultaneously to restrict migration from Central America, from blockades and immigration checkpoints to a formidable system of detention and deportation. Mexican officials have rapidly expanded policing and border and immigration enforcement throughout the country. Such efforts have included a series of high-profile operations beginning in 2001 and culminating in Programa Frontera Sur, a far-reaching plan authorized in 2014 by then-President Enrique Peña Nieto. Under this strategy, and bolstered by the United States, Mexico has fortified its own southern border with Guatemala and deployed hundreds of immigration authorities to the south alongside blockades, checkpoints, and patrols, converting this region into an expansive dragnet and enforcement operation targeting Central American migrants. Since its implementation in 2014, Mexican authorities have apprehended hundreds of thousands of migrants across southern Mexico. By 2015, rates of deportation in Mexico had nearly doubled over the previous year. And since the program's announcement in 2014, the Mexican government has removed more than 500,000 migrants, far exceeding deportation efforts in the United States, and in some years removing twice as many migrants as the United States. Therefore, Mexico, alongside the United States, is now key in controlling, monitoring, and regulating migration across Central and North America. However, while ample geographic attention has been given to bordering practices and immigration enforcement in the US context, much less has been devoted to the ways in which these mechanisms operate in Mexico, Central America, and beyond.
Awkward, but we are sharing the paper. So we examine Programa Frontera Sur and related Mexican immigration policy to uncover the spatial dimensions and contested politics of immigration enforcement in Mexico and beyond. We explore how Mexican immigration enforcement relies on these spatial hierarchies that divide North America from Central and South America through colonial logics. We define spatial hierarchies as the imagined economic, political, and social ordering of territorial spaces. While the notion of hierarchy, particularly as it relates to scale, has been utilized by geographers for some time, it has rarely been employed in relation to bordering practices and immigration enforcement. As we demonstrate, Mexican officials mobilize such hierarchies and a colonial imagination to partition North America from Central and South America, subordinating Central and South America as inferior while simultaneously reinforcing North America's political, economic, and social superiority. The construction of spatial hierarchies is rooted in the longue durée of Mexico's economic and political relations with its international neighbors. Current policy and practice did not emerge in a vacuum, of course, and the current configuration of the border was forged as part of the national imagining and making of Mexico in the 19th century. The national construction of Mexico necessarily entailed differentiating it from its southern counterpart, Guatemala. Such processes of nation building, which render borderlands marginal and peripheral to the territorial state, become integral to the assertion of sovereignty in historically entangled areas. The state of Chiapas, in particular, illustrates the contested history of this region, reminding us anew that political boundaries are often instantiated through top-down forces, operating quite far from everyday cross-border connections. We have the whole section in the paper where we talk about the Hispanicization campaigns undertaken by the Mexican government, and I'm not going to go too deeply into that because we're running out of time. But we do talk about the 200 years of nation building in Mexico and the internalization of the political boundary between Guatemala and Mexico. And that, with that comes an association of indigeneity with the Guatemalan nationality in spite of these close cross-border ties and the characteristic porosity of this boundary. So in our paper, we conceptualize these spatial hierarchies, or the ways in which territorial arrangements mark socio-spatial boundaries of inclusion and exclusion. In defining who belongs and who does not, this differentiation relies on hierarchical categories such as ethnicity, race, religion, and class, among other things. Power and state sovereignty thus work through territorial divisions and control over boundaries that are fundamentally hierarchical in nature, where space is partitioned, controlled, and administered according to perceived cultural and political differences. In Mexico, these scaling processes have involved differentiating the southern frontier in Chiapas from Guatemala, subordinating the latter as distinctly indigenous and non-Mexican. So we demonstrate Mexican immigration policy has relied upon these divisions of space to engage in border and immigration enforcement, which continuously subordinates Central and South America as inferior and separates North America, including the US and Mexico.
So we devote a large part of our paper to tracing the emergence of spatial hierarchies through three distinct policies in Mexico. Plan Sur, the Mérida Initiative, and as we highlighted at the beginning of our talk, 2014's Programa Frontera Sur. And while we don't have sufficient time to really outline any of our analysis in detail here, I'd like to just emphasize the geography and the rhetoric used to justify Programa Frontera Sur. For example, when responding to a question posed during a press conference before the policy was announced, I&M Commissioner Felipe de Jesus said, "I can tell you of the very serious problems of insecurity, of the unhealthiness of sleeping on the streets in all the border cities, and this is due to the thousands of undocumented immigrants entering Mexico, and for national security and national sovereignty, this institute will have to solve the problem." Similarly, once the policy was announced, it was described by Mexican officials as a, quote, comprehensive program, end quote, to address, quote, the problem generated by migration south of the Mexican-Guatemalan border, end quote. The geography of Programa Frontera Sur is indicative of such rhetoric, which worked to depict Central Americans as dirty, unhealthy, criminal, and a problem. Indeed, one of the chief mechanisms operating within Programa Frontera Sur are its so-called belts of control, which you can see here, which concentrate checkpoints, inspection points, and patrols across southern Mexico, including most notably, as we've already highlighted, in the south of Mexico in states like Chiapas. This regional enforcement strategy partitions Central, North, and South America by dividing northern Mexico from the United States, on the one hand, and on the other hand, southern Mexico from other countries to the south. Drawing from these spatial hierarchies, Mexican officials distanced themselves from Central and South America, again, thereby portraying Mexico and the United States in North America as removed from these countries. Such evidence, we really conclude, illustrates how the divisions created through such policy rhetoric and practice are defined through this production and social ordering of territorial spaces based on differentiation. Notably, again, North America is separated from Central and South America, a move which designates the former territories as inferior and the latter as superior, as is based upon longer histories of colonial imaginaries. Thank you.
And the pictures were by Guillermo Arias. And the last paper is by Jussi, Laine, the Finnish-Russian border revisited, rebordering the pragmatic frame.
Thank you, Emmanuel. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for Elizabeth and Andran for putting this together, and thank you for accommodating my request to change the title and the whole talk, actually, because I submitted something extremely theoretical when the call was open, but then things started to go wrong at the Finnish-Russian border, and I thought that would be rather interesting to update you what is going on. Very much working process in the sense that much of the debate that I'm referring to actually took place yesterday, when the government made a decision or got the backing from all the parties in Finland to start building the border fence. And those of who might follow me on Twitter noticed that there was quite a bit of discussion between myself and our Prime Minister, Sanna Marin, who you might know from other incidences as well. The Finnish-Russian border, that's basically what it looks like, right? Given the fact that it runs through nothing but forest and lakes, it's been rather interesting in terms of border studies. Probably the border that a very high number of papers have been written during the last 20 or 30 years. To me, it has always been a very fascinating laboratory through which to understand border change. The fence has been there for quite a long time. This is how the border looks like, has been looking like for the last 50 years or so. The border is 1,334 kilometers long, so it's a pretty long border, and the surveillance is somewhere at this level. It's important to understand that the idea of a border in this case differs greatly from many of the borders that you might be more familiar with, such as the US-Mexico case, where you can basically drive your car at the border, take one step, and you are in another country. In our case, both sides come with a rather extensive border zone where all the movement is highly restricted. Since the collapse of the Soviet Union, this border zone has been shrinking on both sides. During the Cold War, on the Soviet side, it used to be up to 280 kilometers away from the border, and on the Finnish side, between 10 and 15 kilometers. But this is how it has been viewed during the last year. It's basically a cut through the forest. There's a lot of technology in the forest. It quite often happens that somebody tries to access the border zone without the permission, and the border guard comes and they tell you exactly that this is where you walked, this is where you had a cigarette, there is where you threw your cigarette, and it's surprisingly well organized, and that has been sufficient during the last 30 years. But now, because all the other countries are walling their borders, we have decided to do the same. Apologies, my slides were in wrong order. This is showing the extent of the actual border zone area. So what took place yesterday, and I don't assume that you follow the Finnish media extensively. I think you should. It's a fascinating arena for border discussion. But anyways, the government approved the fence yesterday without really any discussion. The only party that they consulted was the border guard, and some of my writings here criticized that pretty much, because of course if you consult the border guard, it's quite understandable that they will support building the fence. It will make their life easier, right? It's an organization that has limited resources, and we have a very long border. They find it very, very useful, but I tried to argue quite a bit yesterday while sitting there to the Prime Minister that we have quite a bit of facts to show. We have a lot of research to show, and many of you presented yesterday the facts that border fences can be very ineffective, they can be counterproductive, and this is the message that I'm trying to bring through as well. So the border guard is requesting from the government something between 300 and 400 million euro for the fence at the moment. As I said, the actual border is 1,300 kilometers long, and they're planning to build a fence on strategic points at the border. Basically on both sides of the official border crossing points. The fence is going to be somewhere between 230 and 280 kilometers long, meaning that 1 kilometer will cost more than 1 million euro, basically of course taxpayers' money. But the point is that I don't think we are really talking about the fence here, and nobody has really defined carefully what are we trying to solve with this fence. And my argument is that the rhetoric that has been utilized to push this fence idea is very separate from the actual fence, because we are now living in the era where our eastern neighbor, of course, is in a war, in a ridiculous war, and given the history of our country, a lot of people are rather fearful about what is going on. The media has not been helping this fearful situation, because these kind of images are published in the media all the time, showing how big the Russian army is, what is left of that. They are making comparisons on daily basis if the Finnish army can actually beat the Russian army. They are counting on the satellites how many fighter jets are on the military airports across the border, how many tanks have been brought in, if they are moving on daily basis, where are they moving. They are circulating. That yesterday there was 2 planes, now there are 3. These are the Russian strategic bombers. So all of this is going on. And then the solution that the government is providing, that we'll put a fence at the border, which to me is there's a bit of a mismatch there. The whole fence discussion, of course, started during the spring, following the developments at the border between Belarus and Poland, and Belarus and Lithuania, where the Russian government, of course, together with Belarus, were using asylum seekers and refugees from third countries as political leverage, pushing them to the EU border and trying to push them across that as a means of hybrid warfare. And Finland thought that we need to do the same, because Russia might act as the same way. But from that discussion, we have evolved now to this rather military-oriented discussion, considering Russia as a military threat, but still the wall is offered as a solution for that. And of course, if we are going to the direction that we are dealing with these kind of imaginaries, I don't think it doesn't really matter if the wall is there or not, or if it's the barbed wire that we saw, or something more concrete. The second aspect why we are talking about the fence is this, that Frontex has been pushing a lot of material, maps, and claims that so many Russian nationals are fleeing out of Russia and trying to find ways to cross the border illegally. The fear here is that many borders, such as the one between Finland and Russia, was closed in terms of visas. The Russian citizens can no longer cross the border with tourist visa, which used to be a very common thing to do. Of course, they can if they have families or dual citizenships or student visas, or if they are in transit through Finland to any other country that does not ban Russian travels. The border is rather interesting now because the lines are pretty long. You can't cross it by car. A lot of Russians are actually coming by bicycles across the border because they can skip the line. They dodge the bicycles and then try to find ways across the border. Why many Russians are fearful to come to the border, because many of them are men who are trying to escape being enlisted to the war and taken to fight in Ukraine. But right at the Finnish-Russian border, the Russian military has brought these mobile enlistment offices where they can actually try to stop the people before exiting Russia to Finland and shipping them to Ukraine. So there's quite a bit of tension going on. So how does the fence look like? I'm sorry, it's all finished, but they are brand new maps, and I didn't have time to translate that. But you can see the length of the border there, and the parts on pinkish color are the parts that will be now fenced completely. But you can see that most of the border will not. How the border defense is going to look like is very standard, because it's, they're copying the Frontex model that has been put in place, for example, in the borders of Estonia, Lithuania, Latvia, and in Poland, like we just heard. So the basic principle is the same, and this is my last slide. But the point really is not really the actual technicalities about the fence, because I think that is completely a side story here. I think the actual fence idea is a very misleading one. I think the government has been very much misled, and there's a major mismatch between the perceived problem and the offered solution for that. Research has been completely sidelined, and this is the discussion that I've been trying to kickstart with the policymakers. But let's see how this goes. No conclusions. This is a 2-day research so far. I hope to have conclusions for you later on. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much, Jussi. And this, I don't know if you noticed, but we have a panel that looks at different continents all at once. And I think it's quite impressive. So I congratulate the organizers for this. Now, do we have questions? We have about 45 minutes for questions or comments to anyone of the speakers.
Thank you very much to all speakers for fascinating presentations. Yes, Jussi, question to you, perhaps in form of, could be, yes, conclusion. In your former articles about the Finnish-Russian border, you have always shown the conclusion that this border has been a pragmatic one. And Finnish reactions regarding Russia and Russian different actions have always been, yes, rational and pragmatic from the Soviet times until recently. Do you think that something has changed, will change, and perhaps what's different from Polish reactions regarding recent development in the border region?
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think the Finnish-Russian relations has always been very pragmatic. Now they have changed drastically. I mean, the tradition in Finland for a long, long time was to try not to annoy the eastern neighbor too much, because there was a bit of an off-balanced relations. But things have changed drastically during this year, especially after Mr. Putin started his war. And after that, things have actually escalated and changed surprisingly rapidly. The whole political situation in Finland has changed. Finland applied for the NATO membership almost immediately. And by the way, in Finland, the story goes that Finland will make NATO stronger, not because we need more security from NATO. This is an interesting twist. But even that, a topic that has been discussed basically on daily basis without making any progress during the last 30 years, since the collapse of the Soviet Union. And now, after the war in Ukraine, the decision was made basically in 2 days, which in how politics usually happens is really, really fast. The same happened with the wall or the fence. It was not really discussed publicly at all before the government made a decision to build a fence. For a long, long time in history, the pragmatism meant that despite tense geopolitical relations, there was a lot of collaboration going on at the local and regional level, and quite a bit of efforts were made to keep that interaction going at the same time when the governments maybe did not see eye to eye. This happened already during the Cold War, where things were very, very tense. At the local and regional level, there were people crossing the border and minding their business without really caring about the politics that much. This is something that I meant by the pragmatism. We were able to collaborate without having the same perspective on issues. But that has basically stopped completely. I think this is pragmatism as well. I mean, what would be the pragmatic goal of trying to accommodate closer relations in a situation when the other party is basically acting completely irrationally? So I think it's a pragmatic move also to be very critical towards that. At the same time, if you follow, for example, what our president has been actively doing while being openly critical, very, very critical towards Mr. Putin, he's still the guy who President Biden, for example, calls when he needs to talk to Putin. So we have the dialogue that is ongoing, even when the situation is really, really difficult.
Hi, you've touched on, on media and the role of media in the securitization of the border. Roxham Road is a place here in Canada where migrants can cross irregularly. And Craig Damian-Smith just had that paper recently published a few days ago saying that actually Roxham Road became known by migrants because journalists were talking about it, and because it wasn't like an alternative media. It was Radio Canada, CBC, BBC, what have you, and suddenly Roxham Road had achieved a irregular port of entry, and so the media actually constructed that specific route in the way we're looking at it now. So the one question, and I think all of you are touching on that, how much do you think the media are actually constructing part of our field, and how much we need to maybe address that specific issue of the role of media, both for the migrants and for the border guards or for the governments, which leads to the decision-making process. So that's one thing. And it linked to that, and I think it will wrap up the conference here, and I would like to hear you on that. How do we make our voices heard? Because we are not all UC Laine, right? We cannot all tweet to our Prime Minister on Twitter and get an answer and maybe move the goalpost. So if you're no UC, what do we do as academic? Thank you.
I think that's a really interesting question. And, I get into a sort of tendency to think about how there's so much media now that there are sort of new problems, and this becomes this kind of narrative where, one, you feel old, right? Because you get this kind of discourse that these are fundamentally new problems that have come with technology. But I think if you look historically, this is not the case, right? Especially if you sort of study the history of journalism, there's always been these kind of fantastical constructions of crisis in the history of journalism, and we continue to see that. But one thing that I've found in my own research is, and I think there was a paper on this yesterday, is how migrants and people who are engaged in mobility utilize and adapt to media in different ways. So, for example, the use of WhatsApp is a really great tool, and this is something that I've used in my own work. But media is also a tremendous resource. Especially, this is a little bit far afield, if you think about the crisis of higher education, where some of us cannot, do the field work that we could do in the past because of budgetary issues, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't know if that was too all over the place, but that's just kind of a first thought to maybe get us going.
Thank you, Elizabeth. I really like this idea of media as a resource. I think that's an opportunity. I mean, we quite often frame it the other way around, and quite often it is the other way around, but it's not always like this. And I think especially some of the pictures that I showed, I think yesterday I gave 11 interviews for the Finnish, Swedish and Norwegian media. All of them went through. They wrote really nice stories which are very, very critical, all of them, challenging very much the official way of talking about the border and defense. So for me, it's a very much a resource. In the sense, we just need to be better at capitalizing that. It takes quite a bit of effort sometimes, and you feel like you're repeating yourself quite a bit. For the second topic, even though I may have access to our Prime Minister, I don't think she's really listening to me. Which is shocking, of course, and that is a challenge. But I think it's important to engage in these conversations. In Finland, we're a small country. It's easy to contact anybody. But then, how much of an impact am I actually making? I don't know. I really don't know.
I will take your question about the media to public education. Okay, but public education is very important regarding peace and building trust and everything related to make peace or build a wall or stop illegal immigration or violating human rights. Now, the problem with media is that the present-day correspondents are younger than previous generations, less educated, less experienced, more market-oriented, and under heavy pressure the politicians have great say in the media because they put heavy pressure on the media. And all this create a problem. Now, with the social media, which is not so much controlled, the opportunities are much, much greater. Regarding my case study on Jerusalem, is most of the Israelis don't know Jerusalem at all. People who live in Tel Aviv area in the Coast Plain, they don't come to Jerusalem unless they have a very special reason to visit, celebrate something or so. And there is an alienation wall, unseen between the Tel Aviv people, let's say as a metaphor, and the Jerusalemites. They even physically they cross a certain point and they start shaking out of fear what's going on in this confrontation city, because it is a frontier city not only between Israelis and Palestinians, but also when really ultra-Orthodox and conservative and, let's say, not so Orthodox and secular, between poor and rich, and so on. So it's a frontier, and always the frontier in the mindset of the population is far away there. Okay, and it's better that it will stay there and not bring the frontier to us. So the problem is how to bring to the fore of Israelis and to Palestinians, and I will speak immediately about the Palestinians, to the Israelis, the situation on the ground in Jerusalem. The relationship that emerged, the close cooperation on many fields in education. For instance, in the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, there are more than 500, I think close to 700 Palestinian students from East Jerusalem, not Israeli citizens, but East Jerusalem residents. So there are changes on everyday life conditions between Israelis and Palestinians within the city. In West Jerusalem, you can find Palestinians going shopping in malls in great numbers and so on. So the Israeli public does not know this. And on the Palestinian side, the problem is that with the Israeli wall and the Israeli control of crossing between the West Bank and Palestinian Jerusalem, East Jerusalem, they don't know how their brothers and sisters in Jerusalem, how they live. There are generations, at least 2 or 3 generations, that never, Palestinian generations, that never visited Al-Haram al-Sharif and East Jerusalem, for instance, because of the Israeli control system and so on. So here, the challenge is really, really big in order to build up the mindset that the physical wall, physical border is against the interest of both sides.
In Hungary, we've seen systematic attacks on media freedom, on media pluralism. Mainstream media close to the government has been complicit in generating a catastrophic discourse. Journalists have been instructed to use the term migráns, which has negative connotations in Hungarian, so they do not use terms like refugees, asylum seekers, but only migrants, but different from the term migrant. And they are depicted as predominantly male, always dangerous and threatening, threatening the motherland of Hungary and representing a civilizational threat on Hungary and on Europe. And many Hungarians have internalized this narrative. Now we remember that the government, Orbán Viktor's government was re-elected this year. So many have internalized this discourse, this narrative. Many believe that there are thousands of Muslim immigrants trying to enter Hungary and destroy the Hungarian culture.
Thank you very much, for this fascinating panel. The last, but not the least. And so I have a question for Saddiki. First, listening to you, I was wondering, how do you read this sort of contradiction between the securitization process and walling, fencing of borders in the Gulf, including the fact that GCC states are also walling and fencing their borders between themselves? In terms of lack of confidence, it's outstanding. For the only regional organization that is supposed to be efficient. So, I was wondering if you have a reading about that, because there is also somehow some migration and work issues, I trust, in thinking about Buraimi. Thank you.
Thank you all for your presentations. And it's a bit of a weird dispositif here, since I want to answer partly what Elizabeth said and move forward also with Jussi's and your presentation, Eszter, on Hungary. It's about the media. Is it about a journalist agency, or is it about who the media belong to and their agenda? Because what we see in Europe, at least, but it's all around the world, but in Europe is what I know more of, is how the media are becoming a great market, and a very concentrated one, with tycoons who own different canals in different countries. And thus, that the border agenda and the securitization agenda is no longer a nationalist agenda. It's
a global economic and a global framing, ideological framing of something that is a bit different, and from that point of view certainly deserves better analysis from us, and criticism, of course. And when the Prime Minister that you were lucky to exchange with answers you on Twitter, she's answering on Twitter. And this is really, and she's making a show on Twitter because it's going to appeal to Finns, but also far beyond. Thank you.
Thank you for your interesting question. Unfortunately, I have not enough time to explain the construction of these walls, but I mentioned that Yemen and Iraq are most targeted by those walls. Iraq is fenced off by Saudi Arabia and Kuwait. Yemen is fenced off by Saudi Arabia, and there is a fence which was planned by Oman, but until now there are no indication that they started building it. But the disagreement between the GCC country are not less dangerous than those that are between GCC member state and their neighbors, especially Iran, Iraq, and Yemen. I think I use in my papers, in my recent publications, the term of regional subsystems, which inherited from the colonial era, which marked by especially the suspicious relations, and especially how states in the region were created, and how also boundaries were delineated and left many territorial disputes between them. Taking the case of the Gulf, even there are many disparities between those states in terms of demographic and geographic size, and also the economic and so on. So there are many causes that make their relations, even if they are in the same regional organizations, are not what the expected, okay? So I can mention here the last Gulf crisis between Qatar on the one hand and Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, and United Arab Emirates, of course, and Egypt. What we cannot understand is in the time what we expect that Qatar, United Arab Emirates, and Bahrain as small countries should be in one side as allies, not against, but to make some balances with Saudi Arabia. But what we happened is the opposite, okay? Because of there are in addition to what I mentioned, some jealousy, yeah, between leaders in the Gulf. Sometimes, even if we can, I try to use international theories to understand the foreign policies of these countries, especially with regard to the security borders. But sometimes we cannot understand some event like what happened in 2019, so-called boycott of Qatar. With regard to irregular migration, yeah, there is a problem with Yemen. But also, United Arab Emirates built a fence with Oman in order, because I spent there 7 years, in order to stop irregular migration. But those migrants are non-Gulf, from non-Gulf nationalities. Those immigrants who came to Oman or Saudi Arabia and they overstayed their visas, then they try to go to other country. I mean, they are not nationals of Gulf states.
Answer the question about Hungarian media. There are many media companies that are in the hands of oligarchs close to Viktor Orban and his circle. Another problem has to do with state-owned media. So instead of providing a platform for authentic political debate, state-owned media has become a mouthpiece for government propaganda. And in rural areas, many watch only the public TV channels, and the number of internet users is lower than what you would expect. So that also explains the popularity of Orbán Viktor's party in rural areas in Hungary.
So this has been super fascinating and learned a lot from all of you. 2 quick questions for Eszter. You talked about the fence, police stations, and housing that make up this political architecture. Can you talk more about how these border hunters interact with this architecture in ways that create this feeling of surveillance, or even you'd had a slide on the microcosm of surveillance that you discussed just a little bit, but 10 minutes isn't much time, and if you could expand on that part of your presentation with just a little bit, that would be wonderful. And just briefly for Jussi, I was curious, in anything coming out in the last couple of days, have there been explanations of how long they expect building these fences to actually take, or where the funds are actually coming from? I'd just be interested. Thank you.
As a member of the media, I felt like I had to come up. I told Todd, I'm going to do it. No. I just wanted to make some comments from a media perspective, and it's just been so interesting hearing all of you speak, because there are so many eerie similarities between what's happening at the US border, the Finnish border, the Hungarian situation, this romance between Republicans and Viktor Orban in Hungary, and there's a lot of the same sort of language about migrants and legislation that is being copied from Viktor Orban. I just wrote a piece about Governor DeSantis sort of modeling himself the governor of Florida after Viktor Orban. And you know, with the rise of all these walls is also the rise of authoritarianism around the world. And it's a very difficult situation for journalists to navigate, because it's at the same time that the business model has fallen apart for journalism, at least in the United States, and technology has completely changed everything. And so, as you notice, journalists have gotten younger because it's not a financially viable business in a lot of countries anymore. And it's also become incredibly dangerous. I work with a lot of journalists in Mexico who, you know, hundreds of journalists have been killed in Mexico. And they're usually the first people to be targeted in different countries where this authoritarian regimes are growing, because they want to control the language. Like you were saying, Orban wants you use this word, you know. I mean, both Todd and I have received threatening messages about our work and how, you know, they're not asylum seekers, they're, they're criminals, they're rapists or whatever. So just, I guess some comments on the similarities that I see between different countries. And then, Jussi, you also mentioned the reporting on Russia, right? Like, they've got all these weapons and it's scary, right? I would imagine there's probably politicians in Finland who are pushing for the wall to be built, and they're talking to those journalists. So, and I know it gets frustrating because you have to talk to like journalists all day long, but it's important that you push back against those politicians that are pushing for those walls, because there's a ton of them in the United States that are pushing for that, both for political reasons and for financial reasons. So we need those people on the other side who can push back against that message, because that message is powerful and well-funded and constant. So.
Well, you mentioned that Orbán Viktor represents a model for right-wing movement groups in the United States and in many parts of Europe. No? Giorgia Meloni's party won the elections in Italy, and in mainstream media represented her erroneously, I believe, as a post-fascist politician, and we could talk more about this, but we don't have time. You mentioned that it is dangerous to be a journalist in Hungary, and this has to do also with social control and this idea of surveillance society, and of course I had in mind Foucault. It is dangerous and problematic, to say the least, to be a journalist. It is sometimes dangerous, but always problematic in Hungary to use social media, Facebook, to externalize, to share one's political ideas. So I've talked to several people who warn their friends, their relatives, their husbands or wives not to express their political opinions on Facebook and other social media platforms, because they would lose their jobs, or they wouldn't be able to find a job if they are already unemployed, which is in fact a major problem in Hungary. So to answer the other question, I do see these new police stations as somehow similar to prisons, and also similar to those blocks of apartments now that existed now in communist Central and Eastern Europe, where neighbors now were controlling each other. Now, so life in these communities, and I believe in Hungary in general, has been sort of homogenized. So we are experiencing a homogenization of behavior, a sort of uniformity has been imposed, a regimentation of life. If you watch these videos that the government has launched on how these border hunters live, they do the same. They wake up, they put on their shoes, they do exercises, they are all muscular or very blonde, and there are very blue, and they do the same, they cook and eat together and go to bed at the same time, and of course think in a very similar way, and of course they are all very committed to building a new Hungary, and in most cases they have only an elementary school education, so that's also very important. Now, the Hungarian government is systematically trying to destroy the educational system, which has been very strong in Hungary. So, but yeah, briefly.
Just I have a fast comparison between Morocco and Gulf with regard to the local media in terms how they use concept or terms of illegal or irregular migration. In Morocco, for example, in recent years, local media, started using the term irregular migration, because of the influence of academic researchers, especially not because they read our publication, but when they make interviews and so on. So I think we influenced a little bit the media mainstream. In the Gulf, until now, they use, for example, infiltrators, المتسللون, and also offenders, which means that they broke or they violated the term of their residence permit and so on. So I talk about the local media, because the issue of migration in the Gulf and especially border walls are still sensitive. So.
The government has allocated €6 million to build a pilot fence that is going to be a couple of kilometers long. I think the construction will start immediately. For the next year, 2023, the government has allocated €136 million for the fence, and the total estimate is 300 plus million euro. That comes from the government, meaning that it comes from the taxpayers' money. The timeline is 3 to 4 years when the whole fence should be completed. For the second point on the media, that's exactly the truth. There are a lot of people who are feeding this very military threat perception to the media. It's important to understand that that goes really well with the Finnish audience. That is the traditional rhetoric on Russia that many of us have been grown up with. And there's something familiarity in that threat. As long as we are talking about the old-fashioned tanks across the border, that is something that we can deal with. And compare the size of the armies, that's something that has been going on for forever. What causes more stress is this unpredictability and then hybrid warfare. And I think a lot of these traditional threat images are repeated for the sake of creating an impression that we are in charge, we can manage the situation.
Okay, I would like to end with optimism. At the moment, we live in Israel within the one regime, and even inside sovereign Israel, the pre-67 war Israel, we live in a mini-scale civil war. It may develop to a full-scale civil war if the government decide to go for an agreement with the Palestinians, and we can identify the roots of it on the ground already, and with regime change that are developing inside Israel. Watch the elections in few days' time. But I'm fully convinced that we will have peace. All wars end sometime, and we will have peace, and it will perhaps not in our lifetime, but we will have it. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.